Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
I don't know what am I going to say. Okay. Welcome everyone. This is the new By Farr new releases for 2020. So welcoming Ben Knight, good friend and helping hand as always in the winery, vineyard and communication. So anyone that knows me personally knows that how much I love writing tasting notes. So rather than doing that, I thought let's just have a quick conversation about the wines that we're offering you today and the vintages that they came from. So today we've got 2019 whites. We have the Viognier and the Chardonnay. And quick little bit about the vintage. It was quite difficult because of a heat wave that came through towards the end of February. So about Feb 27, 28 until 2nd or 3rd of March, I think it was, where we were a little worried about picking fruit simply because the heat wave was coming. So there was a little bit of fruit that was picked prematurely, but we then hit the heat wave and we were even more anxious because we were worried of a lot of sunburning and dehydrating fruit. So what happened was we had 30 pickers with headlamps picking from about 11 o'clock at night until 4 in the morning. And this was to keep the structure and the vitality and the freshness of the fruit at its optimum. So during the night, the vines would take up moisture and would hydrate the berries and would get the full flavour profile while maintaining acidity, where if we picked during the day, the dehydration would mean that the flavours would be far more concentrated and in 40-degree heat would be tasting cooked. So picking timing dates is very important. After this heat wave, we then found that the vines had shut down to the point that we didn't pick Shiraz for another 6 weeks and only got it to about 12 potential alcohol. So the vines had decided, hang on, I don't know what's happened, but I'm not going through this again. And photosynthesis didn't occur very rapidly. So it was quite a prolonged vintage after the heat wave. So it was almost a part of 3 different parts to vintage. There was the fruit that we picked before the heat wave, which is generally far rising, Pinot and Chardonnay. During the heat wave was a bit of Sangreal, By Farr Chardonnay, and then we had Farside, RP, GC Chardonnay, Shiraz picked after. So 3 very different situations and therefore quite different wines. So the Viognier that we're trying to start with, I find it's still a difficult grape to master in knowing how much acidity we need to retain, how much of the apricot flavour we want to be expressed, how much of the sort of oily component that you see in some Viogniers. So for us, it's still very much wanting to keep persistent freshness and vitality in this wine because it then balances out those sort of apricots, fresh apricot or fresh apricot bloom, flowering sort of characters, very floral. So for me, the wine starts quite leesy, but as it opens up in the glass, you start to see a lot more sort of aromatic, exotic fruits coming through.
What are you seeing in the grape on the vine? Like, can you see those apricot characters there?
No, I don't see that. In a cooler vintage, we certainly see that sort of ginger spice, that savoury character, but the apricot doesn't become apparent until fermentation has started.
So how then do you, if you want it to be more apricot-y, how do you choose when to pick based when you don't even know it's sort of there in the grape? That seems crazy.
The apricot flavour and also the oiliness that we seem to exhibit in the wine is coming from the amount of sun exposure. So that is what we've found. From what Gary was making 20 years ago to what we're doing now, it's about how much shading of fruit do we want. So we know that the sunburning of fruit gives it this oily richness to the wine, yet the shaded fruit is where our acidity is. So it's finding that balance. Do we want it to be 20-80? Do we want it to be 50-50? And that's more of an understanding of the vintage. So in a year like 2019, where we've had quite a lot of heat and UV, we're only looking for maybe 20% of fruit exposure. Yet in a vintage like 2017, we're probably looking at 50 to 60% sun exposure.
And where in the property is your Viognier from?
It's the top of the hill, next to the far rising blocks, on a very ironstone-rich base soil. So very hungry soil.
And given that sort of sunburn aspect, do you contemplate sort of the way the vines face the sun? Like, is that a big part of your vineyard management?
It is, particularly in a variety like this. We need to get as much sun exposure on Viognier and Shiraz as possible. Otherwise, we can have years where they're quite underwhelming. We don't get physiological ripeness. We're just not getting that balance of flavour and intensity to come through, and they're just a little bit too, I suppose, in the Viognier, a little bit too dry ginger or green apple characteristics.
Yeah, so it's got plenty of acid, which is good. And I find there's sort of this world where people like the idea of having Viognier, but they don't want any of that apricot character. So you end up with a wine that's not, from my point of view, doesn't represent the grape variety. And then you get the other end of the spectrum, which is sort of too generous, whereas it's got amazing freshness and you could pick it as Viognier, which I think is a big or an important part.
I think there's too many people, they're confused about Viognier. Most people have had a bad experience with Viognier. Not enough people have had great experiences. So people that try a Viognier, you don't tell them it's Viognier to start with. They serve it blind and they're like, wow, what's this? There's so much exotic flavour in the glass, in the nose, the perfume of the wine. But then to have that really quite precise palate that is quite racy and sort of deceptive in its power.
Yeah. That the idea, because I've tried some older ones down at your place, and when I think old Viognier, I normally just think of that real breadth of palate weight. But the ones that I've seen are still pretty fine and got a lot of drive, which is a real sort of a trick show.
It's great to see Viognier aging though. Most people think it's an aromatic white, we should drink this wine young. Viognier is almost the opposite. The ageability of that wine's incredible.
Yeah.
And the way that it opens up and broadens in your mouth with sort of 2-3 years bottle age is fantastic.
Barrel work, do you sort of treat it like Chardonnay?
Not really. We're treating Chardonnay a little bit more like Viognier nowadays. So fouler, which means to foot stomp in French. So we do a lot of foot stomping. Fruit comes in half-ton bins, break up the skins as much as possible because that helps us to extract that apricot and oily character out of the skin. Right. All the flavour is in the skin of Viognier, not really in the juice or the pulp. And so we'll let it sit there, oxidise a little, sort of an hour, 2 hours, and then we'll use the press as if it's a sieve and take only 450 to 550 litres per tonne, which is quite a low level of yielding of juice, where if you look at Chardonnay, we're looking for 650 litres per tonne. So we're only looking for really delicate flavours from the Viognier, and you get so much extraction from it sitting in its own skins over time. You get that mouthfeel, the complexity to come through. And from there, it's a natural fermentation in only old barrels. So a neutral vessel of 4 to 5 years. So you get complexity also from the barrel. Mm-hmm. But you're not getting that over-the-top fruitiness from stainless steel fermentation.
Yeah, looks amazing. I mean, I have to say that because you're there, but it does look amazing. So, everyone talks about natural acid and stuff. Was that, so when you've got a hot year like 2019, did that kind of, that shutting down of the vines kind of thing, did that aid that higher acid levels? And was that a benefit?
It did. Definitely anything that was picked after the heat wave, it was able to retain the acidity that it had with gradual increases in sugar. Where if we were to have a warm to mild season throughout, we'd typically see the acidity to drop off as sugar was going up at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think you guys were getting up at like 3 a.m. I think you let me sleep until about 4, which was nice.
Yeah. You did a great job of cooking breakfast for everyone.
It's a very important job.
So next wine, 2019 Chardonnay, which for anyone that's seen Campbell's review on Winefront, he gave it quite a favourable review. For me, Campbell's the best critic in Australia. I love reading what he has to write. Regardless of a score, everything he writes is intriguing to me. So the Chardonnay, I love this Chardonnay because it was challenging. We actually picked a little bit of it during the heat wave, and then we picked a little bit of it after. So in warmer vintages like this, I think we find that we get a little bit more of that struck match, flinty sort of characters that underline the very prominent by far Chardonnay style, which is, here is my fruit, I look powerful, you start to drink this wine, and there's always this underlining lime, lemon curd, quite fine and delicate structure, which just lingers for quite a long time on your palate. You get that minerality towards the end of the palate, which is quite different to the acidity that then finishes the wine.
It's interesting because it is got, or it's got this real, that there's subtlety to it, which I find really interesting, but it's got tons of acid, but it doesn't stick out. It is that perfect sort of sphere of flavor, acid and texture. Um, and often when you're looking at sort of top end Chardonnays, certainly from WA and things like that, they're way more overt. And some of the Yarra ones are even more sort of, not reductive at all, but more subtle. Whereas this is that perfect sort of in between for me.
Yeah. And this
How
is
much new oak are you using on that?
it's 1/3 new oak.
Okay.
So that's one thing with vine maturity, vine age. We're finding that we're adding less new oak. There seems to be more complexity, more character coming from these older vines now. So there's less manipulation with us doing batonnage or adding different toasts or more new oak. So
yeah,
even though we're adding less new oak than perhaps what we were 5 years ago, we're using a little bit more medium plus, where we might have used 50% new oak 5 years ago and it would have been all medium toast. So horses for courses. It depends on the vintage, what we understand of the season that we've had, and then also perhaps the wines that we've drunk over the previous 5 or 6 years and where we think our palate is at.
Have you seen a vintage like 19 before?
2009, except that for me, we couldn't avoid the harshness. The reality was that we had so much sunburnt fruit that we only picked 25% of some vineyards. We only picked the east side of the canopy, not the west, which got the afternoon sun. Right. And I think those wines are still drinking well now, but I don't think they're wines that are going to be drinking well in another 5 to 10 years. When 19, I think we have enough of a mixture, a blend. We've seen these heat waves come through in the past, so we knew to drop the canopy wise. So where everything was VSP, vertical shoot positioning, and everything would be more exposed, quickly we drop all the wires, we shade the fruit. We had to turn the water on just to maintain canopy, maintain freshness. So we have everything available to make great wine. It's just whether or not, when do you pull the trigger on some of these decisions need to be made.
So the thing that I found interesting with the 2019 vintage was that idea that the vines were kind of breathing in and out, like that early morning versus that midday sun where they kind of had gone baggy almost. Like, had you seen that before?
No, not that extent. And I think that shows that the vines are 10 years older than they were in 2009.
Sure.
I think management of moisture and management of soils and the health of the property in general is that much better. That the deeper the roots, the more acclimatized they're becoming to what our climate is, what our microclimate is.
Yeah, that's good. So I had the 17 the other night from half bottle, so probably faster evolution. But that same kind of lightness of palate, but persistent acid, and we all tend to sort of want to talk about Burgundy, and it's got probably more fruit weight than that, but this beautiful, subtle, seamless wine.
I love the seamlessness and then the way it sort of dances across your palate.
I remember asking you about Malo with another wine, and did you say you use all Malo? 100%?
100% Malo on all white wines, which does surprise people at times because these wines do look quite austere, but we don't have the level of malolactic acid that other regions have. So again, it's very different from what we would do here to Macedon, to Yarra Valley, or even Margaret River.
Yeah.
We don't naturally have as high acidity as these other regions either, but what we do is we find the point where it's balanced with the minerality, with the fruit, with the tannins.
The idea that that's gone through full Malo yet still has that real acid presence, not in a negative way at all, but just it's alive.
Well, I think 10, 15 years ago, the decision to do less batonnage or no batonnage whatsoever, so the stirring of the leaves, suspending the leaves through the wine, which would give it texture and palate weight and sometimes too much broadness, that with Malo is perhaps the style of wine that Gary was making in the 80s and 90s. And that was what he was drinking from Merceau or Polini and other regions. And very quickly we found that Geelong has so much robustness and fullness and grip that we needed to find a more elegant, finer, detailed way to express these wines and not be overawed by the power, tame that power. And I think batonnage has been one thing. Eliminating that has certainly helped in the structure of our wines.
Yeah, it's awesome. What red do you want to do first?
Far side.
So how far away from your house is this?
Far side would be 800 metres.
Okay, but I mean far side because it's the far side of the property. Is it that simple?
Far side, and because my mother was giving me Gary Larson's fashion calendars every Christmas, and it just FARR. It's a really good fit.
So we've got
too happy that we named it Far Side, but anyhow.
two Pinots. What's the big difference? Like, what sets Far Side apart from Sangreal?
I think in the past I've been talking about dark soils of Far Side, rich black volcanic soil. There's some dark brown soils towards the bottom, but then Sangreal was more the red soils. So yes, but now I found that Far Side, it's the clay content that it has. Therefore, the moisture retention that it has, it's slightly different aspect. So it's facing more northeast rather than north, which that slight angle gives it a little bit more shading late in the afternoon. But the clay is the most important because it holds that moisture. Everything's slightly more prolonged. So bud burst a little bit more prolonged. Shoot development, canopy management. Veraison is always that sort of week to 2 weeks longer than what Sangreal is because that soil is dehydrating, or the moisture's passing through the profile very quickly in the red soils. So Far Side to be picked mid-March or late March means that its veraison is happening in a much cooler temperament than what Sangreal is. So Sangreal's ripening the start of February, which can typically be the hottest period of our years. And then if you're looking at Far Side ripening at the end of Feb into March, there's an 8 to 10 degree temperature swing. So that savouriness, that sort of meaty, more detailed tannin structure that I think you see in Far Side is attributed to the moisture holding capacity of that soil, where Sangreal is a lot more limestone based. It runs 2 to 3 metres of limestone runs under 10 centimetres of red volcanic soil, and it simply has more perfume, greater fruitfulness and seamlessness because it actually ripens ahead of time, or a lot quicker than what Far Side does.
Is there any sort of temptation to try to manipulate? Like, I mean, it sounds like those elements of Far Side are all good things. Is there a way that you could sort of try to manipulate Sangreal to have those delayed responses to temperature, or is it too hard?
We certainly do. We're looking to how do we get moisture to the point in that vineyard? How do we maintain moisture? Well, that's almost impossible. But the freeness of that soil, the friability of that soil, so that there is absolutely no runoff. We want every piece of moisture to fall on that land to seep into that soil. So it's about having a soil that's very alive. So the friability, microorganisms, plenty of worms turning that soil over so that it attracts that moisture deeper down into the soil profile, and we could perhaps prolong that season a little.
Nice. The Far Side looks, I mean, not only is the perfume for me sort of spot on, but it's got really nice grip as well.
The grip, the tannin. So I think in the 2001 to perhaps 2010, Far Side was a bit more manipulated by us. There were younger vines. We were pushing the limits to see what we could extract, what characteristics was this vineyard giving us, and how far could we take it. And now we've got to the point with vine maturity, and also looking back on those wines, where were we taking this style from this vineyard? And should we continue in that path, or do we need to alter it? And the last 5 years, I think we've altered it to the point where the vineyard has dictated more that it has greater elegance than what we gave it credit for. So in the past, we were probably over extracting and really trying to push the envelope on making this a dark fruited, strong, robust wine. And now I think it's becoming a little bit more ethereal. It still has those flavors on the nose, but the lightness that it seems to be developing on the palate is, for me, a greater wine than what we've made before.
Yeah, I tend to think of your wines as being pretty big, and that sort of real sort of luxurious mouthfeel. The perfume for me is always there, but that they do feel lighter in the mouth, and that for me accentuates the acid, accentuates that tannin, because it's a bigger shift from a lighter mouthfeel to firmer tannins.
Yes.
It's good.
I think 18's a really good vintage where we've had good rainfall through spring. Canopies looked amazing, full canopies, really balanced fruit load for the amount of canopy that we had. And then we had 24-degree days and no wind from the end of Feb all the way through March. So it's almost this perfect storm where typically we'd be picking fruit over a 3 to 4 week period. We had to pick everything in 10 days.
Wow.
Bang, 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 bang. And I think when you have that sort of really great ripening period where leading up to it, the vines are able to mature the fruit at a rate that it develops a layering effect where we've got this layering of tannins. And I think that's where the tannins seem to be more prominent in this far side 18 than perhaps what a 16 or a 15 were, which have amazing fruit profiles, but just lack that extra dimension of tannin to finish the wine.
Do you see a big difference in berry size? Is that something that you kind of can manipulate in any way, or it's just the season?
I think you've seen our berries; they're as small as anyone's. And I think that comes down to the amount of bunches that we encourage in our vines. So we choose not to crop thin unless absolutely necessary, because if we take bunches away, it just swells up and dilutes the berries that are left.
Yep.
And people will say that that's wrong, but this is what we find in our vineyards. So we actually have done trials where we've crop thinned 2 rows and then left the next 2 rows. And the cropped thin rows actually yielded more kilos per vine than what the cropped were. So yeah, we want small berries, lots of concentration, thick skins, and that's promoted by trusting in what we have, what we've been given for that vintage.
Nice one. The Sangreal, is that the home block?
Home block. Yep. So the original.
And behind me, that's your new Cope vineyards?
That's the Cope vineyard. So east facing. So over to the left, as you look at the screen, is the GC Chardonnay, and to the right is RP Pinot. So perhaps the most advanced vineyard that we have in clonal material, trellising, management, how we're actually farming this has been something that we've learned more and more from our Illawarra wines, a dry-grown vineyard. How can we incorporate that into what we're doing at Bannockburn in a lower rainfall region? And aeration has been a major plus for us, just opening up the earth, allowing more moisture to seep deeper down into the soil profile.
What are you just ripping it? Are you just going out there and
ripping it every sort of couple of years, entrusting that legumes like vetch or some sort of clover, peas with its deep-rooted system would allow for greater moisture penetration. But no, we're trying to do it a little bit more mechanically. We're trying to. And
so Sangreal's that way?
It is to your left. So
and the vines run the opposite way.
Yeah. So if we're looking at Sangreal, which is only 400 meters to the left, that would be running effectively across that slope.
So for that, the lightness of palate thing, because it's, since you mentioned it, and yet they do seem more delicate. How do you change that in a grapevine or in a wine?
Growing conditions,
right,
is key, and then the way that we choose to manage that canopy, how much sunlight to allow into that vineyard. And we're in Australia; we've got ample amount of sunlight and UV, so more about protecting the fruit. We naturally have, as I said, quite robust masculine fruit. So I think winemaking certainly comes into it. But yes, people harp on, it's all about the vineyard, but we've still got to create something from the fruit that we've grown. And doing Gamay for the last 5 years, I think, is something that has helped in my Pinot processes, where Gamay is all about carbonic fermentation. You place it in the tank, it starts fermenting naturally very quickly, and then under its own weight and gases, you get extraction without doing pump overs, without doing punch downs, pigeages. And for the first 4 or 5 days, you get these great aromatics. And then later down the track, you then try and get some extraction happening and breaking up of more skin so that you get greater texture and structure and length in the wine. So initially with the Pinots over the last 10 years, I was extracting lightly, but now I'm not extracting at all for the first 5 or 6 days of fermentation. So we're just looking for that that carbonic character, that lightness, the freshness to be retained until the ferment actually warms up. So at about day 9 or 10, we'd sort of be at 25 to 26 degrees, and we're allowing the temperature to do more extraction for us rather than manually doing it and forcing the issue. And the other thing with that is with whole bunch fermentation, when the stems are in there, if you're scraping and breaking them up while the ferment's quite cold, and also while the stem is quite green and hasn't leached out its colour or matured in that ferment, you're getting more of that herbaceousness, which creates slightly more angled or angular wines when they're young, and it becomes more in the wine. It morphs into greater character and perfume and structure in time. But I think the lightness is also coming because we've got this intercellular fermentation rather than releasing all the sugar at once, fermenting it quite quickly and hot. A whole bunch fermentation is a more gradual process, which is quite cool in its initial fermentation and builds in temperature. And I think that's helping with the lightness of the wine.
Interesting. I mean, because I imagine you'd know the acids throughout the decades of making these wines. And does that change much at all?
Absolutely. Yeah. And that vineyard practices, so covering of the soil, we're finding that the more that we can blanket the soil and keep the temperature of the soil cooler, we're being able to maintain greater acidity. So putting out 700 bales a year of straw across the surface under the vines to, one, retain moisture, create a habitat for microorganisms, but it's keeping the temperature about 5 to 8 degrees cooler than what the mid-rows would be where there's grass being grown. So I think we're retaining greater acidity because of that as well.
And from your point of view, starting off with a base of higher acid, does that allow you to sort of be more creative if you need to be?
I think even less, be less creative if I've got more acidity.
Right.
I think I've got to be more creative to try and make a more balanced wine if I do have to add acid in some vintages.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
They look awesome. Shiraz?
Shiraz? I'm going to say one thing about that 18 Sangreal, that iodine character. I love that blood sort of character that it's got. And that for me is finesse. That's where that Pinot's going.
Oh, good. It's interesting, you guys sort of are famous for your Pinots and your Chardonnays. And the Rhone side tends to be like an afterthought for a lot of people. Whereas, I mean, historically, I think your Shiraz has always been up there, Viognier as well, but it's sort of weird to have such a strong relationship with Burgundy, to also have this sort of Rhone element too that I think gets overlooked too much.
We don't make enough of it. One of the strongest Shirazes we've probably made. There's 4% co-fermented Viognier, so Viognier is picked, and we always want to use the skins as much as possible. There's so much flavour in the skins. It just gives this element of fullness in that mid palate that, in particular, year like 18, where we only really got it to about 12.5 potential alcohol. It just needs a little bit of richness or kick just to get you to the finish line. But
it also goes, I mean, it's light, sort of mid-weight wine, but it crosses that boundary from being just confectionery to that sort of dark olive, that kind of really good cocoa element as well. Like, it seems really settled and ripe, but without being just fruity.
It's the subtlety, the earthiness, the subtle characters about this wine that's that layering effect. I just find that it just carries the wine so well to the end of the palate, which is deceptively long.
From a whole bunch point of view, I mean, you guys sort of, with Pinot, you don't hold back. Well, if you need to, but with Shiraz, what are you doing much whole bunch there?
Not much. Everyone keeps commenting whenever you see a review for By Farr and they say, oh, very much in the By Farr style, a lot of whole cluster use. Well, guess what? There hasn't been any more than 10% in the last 8 years.
Right.
I think that's that savoury edge that this site has. So this is more sandstone, so there's a little bit of spice there, but generally, Shiraz doesn't always ripen here. We're not as warm as everyone thinks we are. We've got very long seasons. As long as we've got cool nights, mild to warm days, it will continue that way.
Yeah. How old are these vines compared to some of your older Pinots? Same?
So Shiraz is 26,
Wow.
26 years. So really, the last 4 or 5 years have been quite expressive and great character, but it's the next 10 years that we're most excited about. Once
Yeah.
you get over that 20-year hurdle, the vines seem to find harmony with where they're planted, and they just become more and more expressive and more complex without actually having to manipulate anything.
It seems like the last few years have been, um, you've been trying lots of different things. You've been talking about kind of, getting microorganisms and changing, being able to drop the temperature of a site by 5 to 8 degrees is huge. Does it feel like you can now just keep tweaking little things, or are there big changes that you'd like to see?
No, there's only little things we're tweaking.
Right.
Yeah. And viticulturally, we're going to try and look at different legumes. We're going, like, we need legumes that switch on and switch off. When do we want them to take moisture from the vineyard, and when do we want them not to take moisture from the vineyard? That sort of thing. So do we go down the route of native grasses? Are we looking at more vetch because it's the deepest root? Maybe lucerne, I'm not sure. But yeah, there's little things in the vineyard, but we're always monitoring the health of the vines, the health of the soil, and then in the winery, what else can we do to handle that fruit less? How can we get greater extraction without actually forcing it by hand?
Is your sort of understanding of the vine health purely sort of showing itself in how the wine is, or do you go out there and just check when leaves are falling off or something? How do you test that?
Balance within purely what we observe and taste. We're not looking for great rewards of this is meticulous, fantastic looking vineyard. It's so rich green, it's canopy. We're looking for, is that the right balance of canopy for that amount of fruit? And are the fruit flavors where we want them to be? Because if the vine becomes too fertile, too much energy is placed on the canopy and not enough in expressing it through the fruit. So fruit is key. Canopy is there to get us to our end point. But I think vine age is the one thing that we need. We want every vineyard to be 40 years of age and to be just at a point where it's just becoming more and more complex, more and more detailed in its expression of that grape variety.
It seems like it's so sort of forward looking. But what are your youngest vines? The Coat Vineyard?
No, I've got another vineyard, which is a close planted vineyard on a north facing slope, but across we're running east west rather than north south on a north facing slope.
Yep.
And that is from all the cuttings, the best vines of Sangreal. So yep. Selection. Not sure where that's going. At the moment, it's doing really well at Alagrec and Ipsos restaurant on the Great Ocean Road.
Yeah, but the idea of wanting 40-year-old vines, maybe we'll catch up again when you're 80 and see how it's looking.
Oh, we won't be alive.
Oh, Christ.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Hope you got something out of this and didn't think we were just rambling. But the order form will be out later today, and please go ahead. There'll be a tasting pack of these wines, or if you'd like to order more than that, please feel free to on the website.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Benjamin. What do you really